Welcome to Autobiology Bits with Jennifer Little Fleck.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autobiology, the podcast with me, your host, Jennifer Little Fleck. And today I have a special guest with me, Jason Wilson. And Jason and I are biohacking friends. And if you recall from my previous episodes with Jonathan Charles Wilson, Jason is Jonathan's cousin. And so we have met through these fun biohacking channels. And, when I was talking with Jason at the most recent conference in Orlando last month, we got on the topic of sleep because, as you well know, biohacking in general is really based around good sleep. And I didn't realize Jason has quite a background in understanding how sleep studies are done and the kind of information that can be gleaned from those studies. So I welcome Jason on the show today. He is going to, fill us in on all kinds of fun stuff that he learned. And I'm not going to say too much more, but Jason, could you say hello and just give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name's Jason Wilson. Like Jennifer was saying, I'm Jonathan's younger cousin by a few years. And so my background in sleep is actually, I was in the United States Navy as a hospital corpsman. And when I joined the Navy, I was working in Washington, D.C. At the White House for a little bit. And then I did my medical training for the Navy, and then they sent me to Naval Hospital Bethesda, or Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. I got assigned to a sleep disorders unit, and I was there for about 2.5 years, going on 3 before I transferred to a few other departments in that hospital. But for those of you who aren't familiar with that hospital, it's the President's Hospital. It's the hospital that the president and all the senators and congressmen, they get treated at. So they're right across the street from the National Institute of Health, which is where like hundreds of billions of dollars get spent every year on different really cool research studies. So there's a lot of funding. So they have a lot of play money, and they get to do a lot of really cool, fun, kind of fringy scientific type stuff that a lot of other hospitals don't get to do because they're more focused on patient care. So it's kind of like a teaching hospital. And so the 2.5 years I was in sleep research, I got to work extensively with neurologists, psychologists, actual sleep doctors, pulmonary doctors, critical care physicians. So I kind of got the whole gamut of sleep and how all these different specialties are trained on sleep, focus on sleep. And I'm not a physician myself. I was just a hospital corpsman. That's essentially kind of like a license, an LPN or an LVN in the Navy. And so I did a lot of that type of stuff. But when I was in the sleep research, I was kind of more just a tech. It was an outpatient clinic. And besides the sleep studies that were done at nighttime. So I got to just kind of like be a geek and go to academic talks every single day on sleep research and really get a pretty comprehensive intake on sleep medicine as a whole, because it's actually one of the newest fields of medicine. It's only been around since like the 80s as an actual like board certification for a physician. And so a lot of these,
it was.
Yeah, sleep medicine is actual. It's a 1-year fellowship. So most like residencies or fellowships are a lot longer. So sleep medicine is just 1 year. It's a really, really fast-paced year where they're primarily diagnosing, they call it like the sister branch of pulmonary medicine, because a lot of sleep issues are like pulmonary related, like sleep apnea, things like that. But of course you have narcolepsy and all those things, but I don't think we're going to get into that too much. We're going to probably focus more today about like sleep optimization and sleep hacks, things that your audience are probably more interested in, because most people are not, in this community at least, are not super focused on deficiencies. They're more focused on how to optimize or what to do. And I know quite a bit about that. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Now, when you started there, were you even aware of the type of sleep research that was going on? Were you into the whole science of sleep at that point, or was this sort of a completely new topic for you?
Yeah, it was kind of a culture shock because I had no idea that I was going to go there. I was thinking I was going to be more kind of on like the inpatient side, like patient care, kind of like older sick people in a hospital. type situation. And when I went in there, it was like, whoa, this is really cool. It was almost kind of like a research type platform. It didn't really feel like I had a 9 to 5 job in a hospital. It felt like I was just like getting to do sleep research projects and showing up to work and staying late at night, and getting to kind of like shadow some of the physicians while they were doing their day-to-day stuff. But it was a really, really cool experience. Prior to being in the Navy, both my parents come from a medical background, so I've always kind of been medically inclined and kind of knew some of the verbiage and stuff. So I was definitely interested to do it, but yeah, I didn't pick where I got to go. The military is kind of like you pick a job, but then when you get there, they tell you what they need you to do. And so they only needed one person in the clinic that was of my pay grade. So I kind of lucked out because it was just like a spur of the moment kind of thing. They had an opening and then they're like, here, go here. And I was like, okay, cool. And I showed up and I was like, wow, this doesn't even really feel like, the military. It kind of feels like I'm like working for a research company. So
Wow, that is so cool. Yeah, I had no idea that you could be assigned posts like that. So that's really interesting. All right. So tell us what did you start seeing, and what are some of the things that you learned that we can implement?
Yeah. So the main thing, and I'll go into a little bit more specified kind of categories like sleep hygiene, sleep supplementation, and things like that. But yeah, the biggest thing when I first got there is I wasn't aware of how many sleep disorders there actually are, even outside of like sleep apnea, because sleep apnea is the big one. Most people heard, get a CPAP. They know a loved one who snores and they assume that person has sleep apnea. And sleep apnea is very detrimental to people's health. Most of the time it's not diagnosed until you have like a significant other, and they can be like, hey man, you seem like you're choking throughout the night. Maybe you should see a doctor. Or maybe they just feel they're grumpy in the morning. They're hard to get up.
Women are really good at diagnosing that.
Yes. So, but believe it or not, you can actually just be a really heavy snorer and not have sleep apnea. So some people, it's just their physiology. Or their sleep position. Some people sleep on their back, which from a sleep apnea perspective is probably the worst position to sleep because you have gravity kind of working against you. But a lot of the times those people tend to be middle-aged people that are overweight. And then what we find out is that once they lose the weight, or they just slightly adjust their sleeping position with like pillows, they don't snore anymore. So okay. But yeah, so sleep apnea was the first thing I kind of got thrown into baptism by fire of like, oh, here's the CPAP machines. And I was like, this is kind of cool. I got to work with a durable medical equipment company that worked right there in the lab, Philips Respironics and ResMed. So they had their techs there, and got to kind of see the technical side of how money is getting put into preventive measures for sleep apnea. And so they have a lot of cool non-invasive and invasive technologies. But it didn't really start to get really interesting, or I guess I wasn't as interested until I started working a lot more with like the neurologists. A lot of the neurologists in the clinic, they have a really interesting background because neurology is one of the grayest medicines. Is when I say gray, it's not super black and white. A lot of the times they are having to be like psychiatrists in the sense of evaluating people's symptoms and what they're complaining about. And then looking at it at a really, really broad spectrum and figuring out what to do. So that's where the neurologists and the psychologists in the clinic, they actually partnered. So if one of the patients came in, they would most of the time talk to one of the sleep docs that have a pulmonary background. If they ruled out sleep apnea with a sleep test and they still had complaints of bad sleeping, or they had like REM behavior disorder, which I'll go into that briefly in a little bit, then they would talk with the neurologist. Then the neurologist would kind of come up with a medical plan, and then they would meet the psychologist and go over some of the psychological stuff. So
that actually makes a lot of sense when you think about all we've learned about nootropics and understanding how different chemicals can obviously affect the neurology of the brain, but how that translates into sleep at night as well. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, the neurology background, I wasn't as familiar with. I think a lot of people hear neurologists and they have a lot of ideas of maybe what they've seen on TV or what neurology actually means. But neurology is a really, really interesting field of medicine because they tend to work with people who have some of the most obscure and serious illnesses. ALS has popularized MS, a lot of these neurological conditions that cause a whole plethora of like symptoms throughout the body. So it's kind of like you're a bit of a detective as a neurologist, because they don't tend to throw medicine at patients as quickly. Sometimes they do. They diagnose, or the main medication that they would give is modafinil or Provigil, which I'm sure a lot of people in the biohacking community have heard of because of Dave Asprey's popularized it. And it's the best way to explain it is it's kind of like a long-acting mild stimulant. It's not like an amphetamine class type drug like Adderall or Ritalin. So it's a little bit slower working. It doesn't get you quite as amped up, but it kind of gives you like a coffee-like focused buzz for up to 24 hours, for some people even longer. The military used it primarily for special forces and for jet pilots. Pilots that were going on like really, really long missions, and they may be really fatigued because they got to just go to back-to-back missions and stuff like that. So they were using that, but the military does prescribe it Provigil for people who have narcolepsy. So yeah, I got to see that. That was my first exposure to it. And off the record, I wasn't prescribed it, but you can source it here in the States. There's a multitude of ways to do it legally. And so I sourced it and tried it out. And so I was kind of doing that and using caffeine and some other nootropics to kind of like see how that worked. I was more at that age, I think, 19 going on 20. On the weekends, I was going out and having fun. So I'd come into work, and even though it was super interesting, I was still tired, and I wanted to be wide awake and be able to learn all these cool things that I was getting taught. So as opposed to like trying to like find some place to put my head down, I was more focused on like, how do I make myself alert even though I am tired, so that I can learn as much as possible in this like, short period of time. Yep. Yes, exactly. So I said, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Let me try to figure out how I can get away with the least amount of sleep as possible. So that's kind of where my passion and the start of my interest in sleep came from. It was like, how can I sleep as little as possible? Sleep seems so stupid. Like, I don't want to waste a third of my life just being unconscious.
Right. But yeah, I'm sure that a lot of young people feel that way, right? I mean, everything is new. Everything's exciting. There's so much to do, so much to see and learn. And yeah, nobody wants to sleep until after you have kids, and then
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's funny how like just the places you're at in life, they definitely affect the way you look. So a lot of like, you the cliches, like, you'll sleep when you're dead or you'll sleep when you're old. It's like a lot of those phrases and stuff got popularized, believe it or not, by the medical community. I didn't realize that for mainstream America, like one of the earliest kind of like introductions into like, you don't need a lot of sleep. It wasn't the military. It was actually the medical community. Johns Hopkins, it's very well known. They have a history of the residency program in their medical school. They had kind of this machoism around like who can do the most work without sleeping. So they had these competitions where, they would try to see as many patients as possible and stay up for as long as they could treating patients. And we know now that's just absolutely insane. Like, I don't think anybody, no one would want to go to a hospital where their doctor that's performing a surgery has been awake for 3 days straight. So
especially now that we know that you can't learn unless you sleep, you have to go through memory consolidation and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
So when did that turn around? I mean, how did we make the jump from sleep as little as possible to you need to a good, solid, deep and REM cycle every night?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of the science didn't start coming out till like the 70s on a lot of these topics, and REM in particular. They were aware of different sleep stages. Did I lose you for a second?
Yeah, just a second. You're good. Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, a lot of the science behind it, they were aware that it was there, but they weren't sure kind of where it all fit into the picture. And so where I think a lot of Matthew Walker talks about this a lot. He's probably one of the most more knowledgeable people on sleep research. He's talked about it pretty extensively, but they started pulling away from it when they started noticing that people, like you said, people who were sleep deprived, even small amounts, weren't able to retain as much information on tests. So a lot of test scores for medical school, for or nursing school, they use those as kind of like a gauge where they started doing research and seeing how people, the cognitive decline on sleep deprivation. And from there, they kind of started making some connections and some correlations and started kind of putting two to two together. So as most sciences, it's anecdotal reports tend to kind of push people in a direction to start picking more specified research, because if no one complains, then no one's interested in doing a study on it. So sleep, that's kind of where sleep has been, why it's so new, is because they're kind of limited from the amounts that they can make money, whether it's like from a pharmaceutical perspective. There's only so much they can do. The stimulant industry is kind of already, caffeine kind of already owns the market. So there's not too many things that they can bring in to pep people up outside of that, legally at least. And so sleep has kind of been the redheaded stepchild. It's kind of been put in the back, and it's like, yeah, we all sleep, but most people just assume intuitively, like we all know how to sleep. Everyone sleeps about the same amount, and that's just not the case. And in the last like 20 to 30 years, it's really become like startling just how much we've learned, and just how much worse the sleep hygiene and the sleep environments and a lot of the technologies we're exposed to have disrupt our sleep quality.
Yeah. I think, and you mentioned Matthew, I am going to hold up his book. Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep. But I think that his book title is pretty apropos, right? Why We Sleep. And that's a question I don't think anybody ever asked is, well, why do we sleep? Like what is the function? Because from a evolutionary perspective,
Yeah, it makes sense.
You want to know why, because it's something that we've retained. And I think like you were saying, that we've only really learned in the last 20 years a lot of the mechanics of what happens while we sleep, with the whole lymphatic system and things like that. So
totally.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Actually?
Yeah, I can go into that. Yeah, so kind of just a basic overview, not to make it too like a 1,000-foot picture of what's going on when we sleep, is, like you said, sleep doesn't really make much sense from an evolutionary perspective, because if we have to be asleep for 8 to 9 hours every night, that kind of puts us in a vulnerable spot.
Right.
Fortunately, humans tend to congregate together, so everyone's not typically asleep at the same time. You always have somebody that's kind of looking out, or standing guard. And believe it or not, people actually have a much easier time falling asleep when they know they're being watched over. It's a bizarre thing, but yeah, they've done studies where when they know somebody's like standing guard, people tend to sleep better. So
that's why the babies don't let us leave the room.
Exactly. Yeah, I think they sense that when the mother or the fathers are awake, looking over them, and so they can rest easy. But yeah, kind of the reason why we need to sleep, we're not entirely sure why it is the way it is. Maybe we'll have to talk to God about that. But what's mostly going on when you transition to sleep is the body is doing two things. It's restoring itself physically and mentally. And so REM sleep is probably the most sensationalized, the most talked about stage of sleep. It's a very important stage. At that stage, our mind's actually much more active than it is when we're awake, and we can monitor that through putting electrodes on people's heads when they're doing a sleep study, watching the rapid eye movement, and just you can see a lot of the cognitive activity when they're dreaming. And so from that perspective, it's like, well, their mind's super awake. It wouldn't seem like you're getting a lot of restoration, but a really interesting thing happens. And then the way I try to explain it to people is it's kind of like a dishwashing cycle. When you go into REM sleep, you have cerebral spinal fluid that goes through your entire spinal column, and it actually goes up into your brain, and it kind of washes over the brain, like literally a fluid. And it kind of does a rinse and wash cycle over your brain. And what it's doing is it's actually removing the amyloid protein plaques that form on the brain during the day when you have all these cognitive, draining tasks where you're thinking and you're doing all these demanding things. And so it's a very simple way to look at it. And that's really how it looks. It looks literally like a rinse and, wash cycle where the cerebral spinal fluid is just kind of going over the brain multiple times. and the brain's firing rapidly, and that's why we were able to enter these dream states. But what it's doing is it's when it hits that state, it's almost kind of like squeezing a sponge, if you will. It's putting your mind into kind of like hyperdrive, and so it's kind of like exposing all those areas where the amyloid plaques and fatigue has been taking place, and then the cerebral spinal fluid's kind of just washing those areas away. And so, but it's cyclical because we go through these cycles, stage 1, 2, 3, and then, REM sleep. Stage 1 and 2 are primary transitional stages. Stage 1 is kind of that stage of sleep where a lot of people are familiar. It's like a cat nap, if you will. Your eyes are closed and you're not really there, but you're pretty cognizant of what's going on. Maybe it's like a Thanksgiving day, you fall asleep on the couch and you can hear all the talking and the football game in the background, but you're there, but you wake up and you definitely feel like you are not awake.
Right.
So that's stage 1. Stage 2 is where you start to lose consciousness, and you start to kind of drift off into just not dreaming, but just unaware of what happens. It's kind of like, you fall asleep and you open your eyes and you've been out for 2 hours. So that's primarily stage 2. Stage 3 is the young people sleep or baby sleep. It's actually a pretty deep stage of sleep. You get into a lot of delta wave sleep when you're in stage 3. And so what's going on there is a lot of HGH spurts are happening. A lot of immunological responses are being restored. And that's why when we get older, our immune system tends to decline because we don't spend a significant amount of time in stage 3 sleep. Not to say that you can't, there's certain supplements you can take that will definitely put you there, or at least keep you there a little bit longer than you otherwise would as you age. But that's where a lot of the physical restoration is going on. A lot of people are like, man, I just don't recover like I used to when I was a kid or when I was a young person. That's because you're missing out on stage 3 sleep. Nobody recovers during the day. You recover at nighttime. A lot of these hormetic responses that take place during stage 3 and when you're asleep, they do a lot of that physical restoration. And there's a reason why you wake up after, when we're sick, we want to sleep more. And that's because we'll spend more time in that stage 3 where our immune system's kind of like getting a booster. And it's not just because we're walking around, because it's not that draining to be conscious, but it's what we get when we go into these stages of sleep that renews us. It's not just the time of sleep. So that's kind of just a general overview of sleep. We go through these cycles multiple times each night. If we have things that are impeding us, whether it's environmentally or pharmacologically, like caffeine or certain stimulants, they're going to make those sleep cycles a lot shorter, or they're going to make it to where we just can't access those sleep cycles. So you'll wake up feeling really unrestored or worse than when you fell asleep. That's possible. A lot of people can wake up the next morning and actually feel a lot worse than the night before, because you're kind of just spinning your wheels if you don't go through those stages effectively, or if you're not primed to enter those stages well, then you'll wake up and you'll feel like you really didn't even get a night of sleep. So
I've always heard that you feel worse whenever you have not been able to have that lymphatic cleansing, because now you essentially have all this toxin buildup in your brain, and that's why you feel like crap.
yeah.
And I just, the fact that our brain does that is so amazing to me. And like I said before, the part that's so amazing is we just figured this out like in the last 20 years. I mean, it's crazy, basically in your and my lifetime, we're figuring this stuff out, and gosh, who knows what we're going to figure out, in the next 20 years, when it comes to that. The other thing that I thought was cool that I had learned is that when we're in that super deep sleep, our brain actually secretes a chemical that partially paralyzes us so that the brain can do that shrinky thing and go through the wash cycle, so that we're not going to be prone to like getting up and walking around or sleepwalking or hurting ourselves while the brain is in this delicate phase. So I thought that was really, really interesting as well.
Yeah. I think I had mentioned earlier about REM behavior disorder. So I'll go into that really quickly. What you were mentioning though is that when we wake up, real quick, I'll touch on this. When we wake up, sometimes we feel worse, right? And so a lot of people aren't exactly sure why that is, and it's partially the lymphatic system. But what our best understanding is that the reason why we wake up sometimes and we feel a lot worse is, if you can imagine, if you put your clothes in the washer and you opened the door on the washer, like let's say there was no locking system, you open the door on the washer in the middle of the rinse cycle and they were just sopping wet with soap, you would be like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. This is not the way I should be taking them out of the washer. They should be kind of wrung to some extent and wet, but not like sopping wet. And so because of that, where we wake up in the sleep cycle has a lot to do with how we feel when we wake up. So when we wake up in really, really deep sleep stages or in REM sleep, we tend to be startled. In the deep stage, we tend to feel like an insurmountable amount of fatigue, where it's like, I cannot possibly be awake. Like, this is so exhausting. I have to go back to sleep. Like you're just trying everything to keep your eyes open. The REM sleep, we tend to be more startled. It tends to be like being kind of jolted out of your sleep. A lot of times people will have nightmares, or they'll have a dream and they'll feel like almost kind of a forceful awakening. And that can be startling for some people. For some people, it could just put you in a grumpy mood and you're not even sure why. But then when you look back onto it, you're like, oh yeah, I did kind of abruptly get jolted out of my sleep. So when we wake up in our lighter stages of sleep, that tends to be that gradual opening of the eyes. And you're kind of like, you may want to go back to sleep, but you're kind of like, like you have that guilty thing in the back of your head that's like, I'm totally ready to get up. I just don't want to get up. And so, yeah, so waking up in certain stages of sleep definitely have a pretty important impact on how we start the day off. And there's certain things that you can do, certain hacks that you can do to increase your likelihood of waking up in lighter stages of sleep.
Oh, tell us about that. That's what I want to know.
Yeah. So
is step one, get rid of your alarm clock?
Yeah, alarm clocks are actually really horrible because they tend to wake us up in the worst time. I mean, sometimes they're lucky, broken clocks right once or twice a day.
Yeah.
And so you can time the alarm clock, but really humans, we didn't have alarm clocks, hundreds and thousands of years ago. We used light. We used heat when the sun would heat us. And then the last thing typically was like, we use sound. If you heard like a rooster crow, right? People have like, oh, a rooster, that must be, it's funny because in America, we look at like a farm as like this kind of like, oh, it's a very natural thing, but the farm system and like, farms and chickens, and that's actually kind of like a relatively recent thing. Like at least the way we view it, so that probably wasn't the case, or that was the least important. So the first two is light and then warmth. So if you can time, if you have like smart lights, smart bulbs, and you can time like an amber glow, Philips lights, they actually make a sleep alarm that's just, it looks like the sun. It's like this circular kind of light, and it's giving off the exact light frequencies in the morning as the sun is. So if you put one of those in your room, then what it does is over a period of like an hour, it slowly starts lighting and it starts changing the light frequency.
I need that.
And simulating a sunrise.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's a problem. We're getting into winter now here, and I'm on the east, on the East Coast, and we're at that phase already where it is still pitch dark out, and we have to get the kids up for school. So
introducing as much light and the right light, not blue light, but like is warm of a light, like an amber type lights in the morning, but getting them at the highest lux possible, the highest lumens that you can get with the right colors will really, you'll feel awake. And it's not instantaneous. It's not like a shot of espresso, but it's definitely, it actually starts working before you're awake. So with kids, it might be a little bit more difficult. I know, if you're sleeping with your spouse, then it's a little bit easier. Maybe you have a little bit less clothes on. And what I mean by that is that you have photoreceptors all over your skin. So when you're asleep, if that light turns on and those certain frequencies of that light hit your skin, what they're doing is they're actually slowly and very comfortably dragging you out of those deeper stages of sleep and pulling you down to the lighter stages, so that if your significant other bumps into you, or if you hear a noise and you slowly start to open your eyes and you're waking up, you'll feel more restored, or at least you won't feel startled, because nobody wants to start off the day feeling startled.
Yeah, I hate that feeling. That's a horrible.
Yeah. Light's good. The second one is warmth. So it's really, really good to be in a cool environment when we fall asleep. But when we're coming out of sleep, the number one thing that will get us there comfortably is feeling warm. That's why when people wake up in the morning, they don't want to get out of bed, right? They got their, especially for somebody who's living on the East Coast, they got the down comforter, the pillows. They're, maybe they're cuddled up next to somebody, and they just don't want to leave that very, very like safe and comfortable spot. So having something that can give you almost a little bit too much warmth will help you wake up. And so I have the Uller sleep system, or the chili pad. People are familiar with that.
You do? I was just going to ask you, does it have that setting? Can it switch temperature?
It does.
No way.
Yeah, the Uller has that. So at night I sleep at about 65 degrees. Okay. And what it is for your audience is it's a pretty cool. It's my favorite sleep hack. It's a machine that's circulating either cooled or warmed water through these little tubes that go through a really comfy pad that you put underneath your sheets at night, and it can be for the whole bed or just for your side. My significant other, she likes it, but she hasn't really found like the right temperature for her. So she tries to use it, but a lot of the times she ends up putting it on a little bit too hot or a little bit too cold. So she hasn't found that just right spot. For me, I'm kind of like whatever. I can have it on an ice cold or not super cold, but 65 is my sweet spot. So I keep it at 65 most nights. Okay. But what it does is it circulates this cold water throughout the night. You just put the little box. It's not very big, underneath your bed or on the side of it. And then the Uller system's a little bit less maintenance. The chili pad was their first iteration. It's very simple concept. It's the same thing. The only difference is it's not Bluetooth compatible. You have to manually turn it off and turn it on. Okay. All the settings are on the device that you have to click the temperature. Okay. So it's less specified. It's kind of like cold and then warm, and you kind of have to like use your hand to figure out what that is. And then it doesn't have a heating setting. It goes only cold. So it goes from like cold to coldest. Where the Uller is Bluetooth, so it has an app. I can turn it on anywhere in the house and not have to be in my bedroom. So if I'm upstairs and I'm watching a movie and I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna go to bed in about an hour, I can start cooling the bed off beforehand. And I have a down blanket, so the down comforter really retains that cold temperature underneath it. So I know for those of you on the East Coast, you're like, oh, cold, that sounds horrible, but we'll go more into sleep hygiene in a little bit. But what you can do to make that actually sound really like nice, because I know when it's freezing cold outside, jumping into a cold bed sounds like gross.
Yeah, it's so weird though, but I have to say, Jason, sometimes I feel that way, right? I'm crawling into bed and I'm like so cold, but literally within like 15 minutes, my husband and I are both like whipping the blankets off. We're dying. We're hot. And, 50% of the time, one of us ends up downstairs on the couch because it's like 10 degrees cooler downstairs than it is upstairs. Right. And it's specifically because of getting too hot, that we end up leaving the bed.
Two bodies next to each other, that generates a lot of body heat.
He's a giant heater, I mean,
yep.
Yeah.
Typically the man, it's too hot.
Yeah. And then when I have cats who decide they sleep like on your face, and then I can't stand it because it's so hot. But yeah, so I can understand why that would actually be preferred.
Yeah. So yeah, the sorry about that. Dogs barking. So what's the heat aspect of it in the morning. The reason why that's so important is that give me 1 second. I'm gonna try to, this might be, is it coming in the dark, the dog barking pretty loud?
I can hear it, but I think most of the world is used to barking dogs in the back.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, he'll probably stop it. So
so I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, he's not my dog. He's my roommate, so he's a little persistent on the barking. But at night, the reason why we want to be cold is because our bodies naturally, the sun's going down, it's getting cold outside. So a lot of what nature does, humans have been in nature for forever. So we emulate these patterns. And so at night, when you're cooling off, it's the cooling off response of the body that puts us in a more receptive state to fall asleep. So it doesn't, I think a lot of people think it means like getting cold. That's not actually the case. It's getting warm and then cooling off. So that sounds a lot more appealing to people, like, oh, jump in a warm jacuzzi, take a warm bath, take a warm shower before we fall asleep. And a lot of people, it's like, especially if you're in a cold environment, you're on the East Coast, you're somewhere where it's a lot chillier. That sounds like something that most people could definitely throw into their schedule. It doesn't have to be long, just enough to get the most of the surface area of your body heated up, 5 to 10 degrees on the outside, which you could easily accomplish doing a plethora of things, but shower, bath, sauna, those are really, really, really effective. And then as you get out, your body temperature will start rapidly dropping right back to where it's supposed to be. And then that process is what causes that fatigue to set in, that sleepiness, that kind of like, that sensation. So when you go from that cooling off period and then you get into like a really, really cold environment, like with the Uller or just in a temperature controlled room, that's what causes us to fall into the deep, like the stage 3 and the deep stage of sleep a lot more effectively.
Okay, so it's actually like a 3-stage process. We want to get warm, and then we want to cool off, and then when we're waking up, we want to warm up again.
Yeah, and staying cool throughout the night's a big thing too, because I know probably a lot of people anecdotally have experienced like they've stayed with the in-laws or they stayed with somebody where it's really warm and you're like, man, I cannot stay asleep. You end up waking up throughout the night, you're sweating, you're like looking for a fan desperately, you're going to the kitchen to get some ice water to cool off.
Yes.
You want to stay cool throughout the night. And so on the East Coast, that's easy. And some areas where, my parents, they just recently moved to the East Coast, but they were living in Phoenix for the last 5 years. And I would go visit them during the summer.
Wow.
And it's like 105 at night during the summer. And so one of their guest rooms, the registry that the air conditioning went through, it didn't work that well. So that room tended to heat up. I don't know if it was the insulation or what, but I'm used to most rooms at night sleeping in like 70 to 65, right? And so that room felt like it was 81 and I could not stay asleep for the life of me. So
would you go do, like, sleep in the bathtub or something?
I went downstairs and slept on like a leather couch where it was cooler. So we're sleeping on the floor, because obviously hot air rises. So it was on the second floor of that bedroom. So I went downstairs and it was a little bit, it was a lot cooler. It was closer to 70.
All right.
But yeah, like you said, waking up in the morning with the warmth, that's also like the last stage. And that's what helps you kind of want to get out of bed.
All right. So temperature is really important, which I only recently learned. And I have to say the other thing that and when I say recently, probably within the last 2 years when I really started looking at sleep, the other thing is all about the blue light. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that anybody who's never really thought about sleep has no idea about the whole blue light thing.
Yeah, so I wear contacts. I haven't had LASIK or any other eye surgery yet. I'm waiting. My dad's in that industry, so I'm gonna be getting it here pretty soon. But I kind of wanted to wait and find the right doctor because I do have a little bit of astigmatism. So some of the physicians I wasn't comfortable enough to have them perform the surgery. But I wear these during the day a lot of the times, especially if I'm going to be looking at a computer screen or watching television or just anything that's got a device where it's emitting blue light. These have a gentle blue light blocking lens on them, but I do have my Swan Wicks. I do have my nighttime, and you can see there's a pretty big difference there. These are not red, but they are amber, and they block out a tremendous amount of the blue light. And so I do put these on at night whenever the sun goes down. Dave Asprey's got a company, Swan Wick. They've been around for a long time. I use those at night. These glasses are Kinovision. That's a guy who does the ketogenic type diet. He was big in the blue light blocking quite a few years ago, and so he launched his own pair of glasses. And I think there's a little bit more stylish than some of the other brands I've seen. So I got these, but you can get them pretty affordably. I think like a pair of daylight blue light blocking glasses are going to run you like maybe $30 to $50. The nighttime ones around $100. Those are really, I think, important for a lot of people if you spend a lot of time in front of the screen, because blue light is not something that happens instantaneous. I know a lot of people, they go, oh, you know what, let me not sleep with the TV on, or let me turn it off so I can go to sleep. It's a long-term thing. The amount of blue light's not all bad. In the morning, it's a good idea to get a little bit of blue light. It's a very energizing type light spectrum for your mind.
Okay.
And so if you're on the East Coast and you're in or anywhere there's a lot of cloud cover and you don't get the direct sunlight, it's really cloudy and kind of, I don't want to use the word gloomy because I do plan on moving back to the East Coast. I'm not looking forward to gloomy weather, but a lack of blue skies, which can be for quite a few months in the East Coast.
Yeah, we're about to start that period of time.
Yes, I know you're not looking forward to it. So.
I am not. I got my red light ready though. So.
Yes. So yeah, red light, blue light, but even, for some people who have a seasonal affective disorder, SAD, having a blue light actually is really important too, because that blue light's stimulating some of the light spectrum that you would have gotten from the sun when it was up in the sky. And so that can energize you. A lot of people are kind of fatigued throughout the better part of the morning in areas where it's gloomier outside. Because they're not getting that blue light. Or you can just, you can simulate it through a plethora of ways. But yeah, so the blue light, what it's doing is you have these photoreceptors in the back of your eyes. And so when you see the blue light, it's stimulating those photoreceptors. And where that really is important to sleep is that it will inhibit melatonin or produce cortisol. So obviously high cortisol levels, not good. A little bit of cortisol is very important. It's responsible for most of the processes in the body as far as like get up, get things going. Right. That's why our cortisol levels are the highest in the morning. Right. We don't want to add to that fire, but we certainly want to kind of keep it down at nighttime when we're trying to relax and fall asleep. And so wearing the blue light blocking glasses, what it does is when you inhibit that blue light, you give your mind, your brain, the ability to start producing melatonin. And it's a slow drip. It's not like on and off. So it takes about 2 to 3 hours of almost complete blue light getting through your photoreceptors for your mind to produce an ample amount of melatonin to help you fall asleep. And as you can imagine, you probably know very few people who are sitting by in pitch black or maybe a candlelight in the distance of their house that are in that type of state to fall asleep. Most people, they got the TV on, the kids have iPads in front of them, a lot of blue light that's going on in the household. And so instead of trying to go and tape red screens on all the red, films on all the screens, just buying a pair of the blue light blocking glasses help a lot. Also at night, until you're actually really ready to fall asleep, wearing as much clothing as possible, believe it or not, because you have photoreceptors all over your body, and the eyes are a powerful one. But I would say that if you closed your eyes and put yourself in a room that was full of blue light and you were naked, you would be just as worse off as if you were to have if you were to be completely blocking your eyes, because you do have photoreceptors all over your body. So we did this really cool study where what we did was we would have patients sleep in complete darkness in the sleep lab. And then we had this really, really high lux blue light. It was like a pin light that we had on a little cord, and we would tape it to the bottom of the people's feet. And so what we would do is we would have the control group that didn't have the light on, and we'd have the ones where we turned the light on, and they didn't know. So there was no way for them to think they saw something, because we put blacked out tape over it. And it was pretty startling, the difference. The amount of cortisol that was increased and the inhibition of melatonin, and for them to go through those stages throughout the night was vastly different. And that was just from having a pin light size of blue light on the bottom of their feet.
Wow. So that's kind of the basis of why we even tell people to put tape over, every little electronic device light that could possibly light up the room at night, because that's the difference.
Yeah, you really have to kind of be on a mission to get optimal darkness. It doesn't have to be complete darkness, but if you are going to let in light, it should really only be natural light. And I mean, unless you're sleeping, I guess, with like a glass roof over your head where the stars are coming in, it's probably best to in most household environments to just make it as dark as possible. Yeah, so like the power cords, the little green lights, the smoke detectors, you really, your best thing to do is just pick a night and then you know, try to figure out how you can get the room as dark as possible.
Blackout party.
Yeah, a blackout party. So yeah, that's really important. That's why, you know, I said started off with light and with temperature. Those are the two biggest things that we can regulate our sleep hygiene with. So it's worth it. It's not something you have to do all the time, but yeah, just picking like a night and going through your room and kind of seeing what things are might be inhibiting your sleep. EMF is a little bit farther down that list. It's still there, but I think a lot of people have a lot more control over the lights that they're exposed to, as opposed to how the power sources are wired throughout their house. Because unless you're going to rip out all the cords or put down $10,000 paint throughout your house to stop the EMF waves from coming in the rooms, we're a little bit less likely to do that than we are to maybe change the light bulbs or to put some electrical tape over light sources.
I actually have the folks from Defender Shield coming on to talk about that in a couple of weeks. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what they have to say, because, you know, the reality is, you know, that is something that affects your sleep, but, you know, we're just learning the best ways to figure out how to deal with it, because you can't eliminate it. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Yeah. Even if you do, you know, try your hardest, you know, having a cell phone that's not in airplane mode, just there's so many technologies that we're not going to dispense with, that are going to have an impact on our physiology. So we try to mitigate that as much as possible, or at least not be in as vulnerable of a state. But I don't know. I'm not sure where the optimization of that comes into play. So maybe in the future we're going to have some cool technologies. I'm sure the folks at that company are going to be able to give you some cool tips that I'm just unfamiliar with.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely looking forward to it. But as far as some of the more actionable sleep hygiene things that you've learned, what else can we do besides regulating light and temperature?
Yeah. So next would probably be sound. I know sound seems kind of like, oh, okay, how do I, if it's a silent room, then what's going on? So sound is really important. And it's not a particular sound, it's familiarity of sound. So people are like,
explain this, because I'm really curious about this point, because my husband cannot sleep without listening to something all night long. Like he can't sleep in silence. So what is it? What kind of sound should be optimized?
It's familiarity of sound. So it's something that puts you in a relaxed state, and that's going to change. And that's the unfortunate thing for couples, is that you have to figure, maybe you might have to find a compromise. Because, like, believe it or not, what helps me fall asleep is when I was a little kid, I would go over to my grandparents' house, and my grandpa, he was a Vietnam vet, and he would listen to talk radio and smoke cigarettes. And not around me, but he would be on the porch listening to talk radio, and he would smoke his cigarettes outside, and then he'd come inside and he had talk radio on. And my dad picked that up from him. So my dad would listen to like AM talk radio, and like there's a show at night called Coast to Coast. It's like a famous AM talk radio where they talk about like aliens, and they talk about politics, and they just all these different, but typically the talkers have a very monotone voice, and it's like,
yes,
now back to KFI and this and so what I do is and I've been doing it for years, is I have like an Amazon Alexa, and I will put it to this AM talk radio at night at a very, very, very low, where I can almost barely hear it, and I'm actually trying to focus on listening to what they're saying, but it's just so inaudible, but I know it's there, I can hear it, and that helps me fall asleep like a baby. And so it works for my girlfriend too. She's like, oh, that's crazy. And then she started doing it, and she's like, oh, it's for different reasons. Because for her, she said it just bores her to sleep. where for me, it's a comforting aspect. So we laugh about that, but yeah, it's familiarity of sound. So if you're like from New York City, if you were sleeping in complete silence, that would probably really be disturbing to you because you're used to the sirens and you're used to, people shouting or something,
I've heard people say that who moved from the city to the suburbs. They're like, it's too quiet here.
It's too quiet. It's uneasy. Yeah, they feel like something's, or here's another one, believe it or not. This probably comes from a PTSD perspective, but I was talking to my grandpa's neighbor one time on my mom's side, and we were in my grandpa's garden, and there was a grasshopper or there was a cricket, and he was like, "Oh, don't kill the cricket or don't touch the cricket," And I was like, "Oh, okay. What's your interest with crickets?" And he's like, when I was in Vietnam, the crickets were a sentry. We would stay up at night and stuff. And he's like, we would be able to sleep as long as we heard the crickets. But as soon as the crickets stopped chirping, that's because the crickets don't make noise when they detect movement. They stop making noise. And that's why at night you hear them outside. And it's because they're just making their noise because they're talking to each other. But as soon as something comes in, they stop and it gets quiet. And so he said for him, as long as he can hear crickets, he can fall asleep. But probably because of maybe PTSD from being in Vietnam, when the crickets stop and it's dead silent, he wakes up and starts having like panic attacks. So he actually has to sleep with he said he sleeps with like a sound thing that makes cricket chirping noises.
Yeah.
So that's where the psychology aspect of sleep comes in. It's where you have these memories and these emotions that are associated with comfort, and playing those types of sounds, that's what gets you in that state of like, you can let your guard down, you feel safe. It's not about absence of noise, because outside of just blaringly loud sirens and noises that are going to wake you up, having low level sound that's comforting to you isn't going to impact your sleep or alter your dreams dramatically. So,
where I think this is very important is when you talk about babies, because, people who are new to parenthood think that you're supposed to be very quiet and tiptoe around the house when the baby's sleeping. And what I had learned having children later in life, like I did, I was very well read by the time I had my first. And, you actually don't want to do that. And what we did was we had because you learn about how loud it is in the womb and how babies aren't actually used to quiet. Like they're more comforted, like you said, by these really loud whooshing sounds. And so we ran a vacuum cleaner sound on an unbelievably high decibel.
Yeah, you wanted that baby
all
to sleep
night long. And it was to the point, and I did this with both kids. I slept with them for a year in their bedrooms. And so it was like by the end of the year with each kid, like I couldn't sleep without the sound of a vacuum cleaner for like months.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, and then, eventually we all transitioned over to listening to sleep stories on Calm now. That's what we do. But it's that, like you said, that familiarity of sound. So I'm glad you kind of cleared that up, because, I've always been perplexed about the whole sound aspect of things, because I know that my family sleeps better with sound. But the sound is different for everybody, which is interesting.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with your childhood, and so childhood memories or traumatic events, anything that can trigger really the amygdala, that emotional response, even nostalgia. I know some people are, me, myself, I'm a big nostalgia guy. Like for me, like my favorite time of the year is Christmas. I love the sounds of Christmas. I love sleigh bells. I love things like that, because like, I just have, I have really great memories of my childhood and Christmas. Like for whatever reason, Christmas just stands out. So for me, whenever it's Christmas time, the sights, the scents, the smells, it puts me in a good mood. So I'll listen to Christmas music throughout the year just because it puts me in a happy mood. Makes me feel comfortable, kind of brings you back to childhood. So people can use their what they already know about themselves to kind of put themselves in a more, if I were listening to like screamo heavy metal right before I fell asleep, I don't like it at all, and it would probably make me put me in a horrible mood, and I would be really, really like, unable to sleep. So
Right.
a part of it's going to be there's a different flavor for every person of sounds. I would say keep away from loud sounds, explosions. Probably the worst thing you can do right before you fall asleep is watch like an action movie. Where there's a lot of explosions and gunshots. Those are all universally just alarming and triggering things. Whether you like it or not, your body, your mind can't sometimes make out what's reality from what are you looking at on a screen. So if you're looking at something that's got explosions and gunshots right before you go to bed, your brain's going to go into a fight or flight state, even subtly, maybe not to where you're perceptive, but enough to where it's going to impact your sleep. So I would put on something that's, if you are going to watch something or listen to something that's soothing, calming, or funny. Comedy doesn't really have too big of an impact. So if you laugh, that's fine. You can giggle a little bit before you go to bed, but I would stay away from the horror or the action type of movies before you go to sleep.
Gotcha. Have you ever listened to ASMR? Like,
yeah. I'm not as familiar with it because part of me, maybe I just haven't found the right type of ASMR.
I have not found the right type. It creeps me out. I've talked about this previously on other podcasts, but but yeah, that's like it's almost like a creepy whispery type of thing. But for some people, that triggers something for them that is completely calming and relaxing, and puts them right out.
Yeah, that's definitely not me. So I've always, I'm probably in the same boat as you, where I've been like, oh, ASMR, I'm interested in like audio acoustics and like how it impacts people's like relaxation. But no, every time I've gone on YouTube, I've always kind of like regrettably been like, why did I click on that video? It's kind of disturbing. Like it's me, it's like I'm like, I have a high disgust orientation, and so it's like when I can hear people like smacking or chewing, or I can hear the spit in their mouth, it kind of just makes me feel uneasy. And a lot of the ASMR, the microphones, they pick up a lot of that background kind of clicking of the tongue and the spit. And I'm like, that's just not my cup of tea. So, but I know for some people they're like, oh, I love it, it works so great, but that's just not my thing. So
yeah, that's really interesting. I have a friend that I talk about this with all the time. Hey V. But it is really interesting, and I looked into it a little bit, but it's based on how the brain processes very specific signals, and it's genetically based.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, I won't get into it here, but it is a curious.
It makes sense. There can't be that many people who like it, or it hasn't gotten as popular as it has because it doesn't work. So I imagine it works, but like with everything, it's going to work to varying degrees for certain people. So.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, well, we can switch gears to supplementation. I know we've kind of touched on sleep. Has got just so much you could talk about. I know we've kind of touched on like why do we sleep a little bit, some of the reasons why, what's going on, and maybe some of the biggest modalities that we can impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk about supplementation. And if anybody wants to follow you, Jason, what should they do? What's your handles?
Yeah, so it's Jason the Carnivore, and the Carnivore Fisherman. I do a lot of fishing, so I post different things on both of those on Instagram. I don't think I'm on Facebook anymore. That's more just kind of like taking a stand against Facebook, but I am on Instagram, which I know is owned by Facebook, but oh well, you got to be on something. So I'm on Instagram. So
are you on Telegram yet?
I'm not. No, I need to take a look into that. I've been bouncing around, and I think I've been in 4 states in the last like month. I was just in Yosemite as soon as I got back from Orlando. I was in Yosemite for a week, and so I just got back like early last week, or the end of last weekend or week. So, and then I was just at a wedding yesterday, and so before that I was in Ohio, and then Orlando, and then Alabama the week before. So I've been bouncing around. So I haven't been on social media in a little bit, but.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jason. It was a pleasure talking to you, and we'll have to catch up again soon.
Definitely. Thank you.
All right.